This is where I sit. In most situations with tables, I look for the outward view. It provides a sense of comfort and control. At the dinner table at home, I look out the windows. My desk is positioned to see out the window. I also look for seats that keep me from being surprised by guests. I bet I'm not alone choosing seats away from people that annoy me, or talk too much, or ask about things I'd rather not address. Some of my table strategies may be about fear. And I'm not sure that choosing my positioning allows me to engage fear in the healthiest of ways. At the Federal Worker Support Dinner last Sunday, Kate Epperly grounded us with advice from the Persian poet and mystic Hafiz. Fear is the cheapest room in the house. I would like to see you living in better conditions. Fear is the cheapest room in the house. I would like to see you living in better conditions. This is the second time I've lifted up Hafiz, and it won't be the last. Just wait until I find the right sermon for a favorite poem that will really mess with your mind. I like him because he grabs us and gets us to focus anew on life, God, our usual ways, and the usual spaces we inhabit. He shakes us up and invites fresh perspective. I agree with Hafiz that we may need better conditions, but it's good to really understand current conditions before moving. And we should recognize that dealing with fear should be part of a healthy inward-outward journey. Fear is relevant for our inner psychological and emotional life, as well as our social and cultural life. My fear is about what is around me out there and what's within me. There sits my fear. There sits my fear. It's about what is happening in the world and who is in power, and the fear within me at the inner table of Yance, and how I use my power. And by the way, that table has lots of other guests as well, each presenting a different challenge. Today's passage and its conditions are largely about others, but it also contains an invitation to inner exploration. In past months, the inward-outward dynamic has gotten both trickier and more important for us. In some ways, it's taken on new meaning. It offers new ways to know others and ourselves. In today's gospel, Jesus tells us to sit at the lowest place when invited to a banquet. And he warns against inviting friends or your brothers and sisters or your relatives or your rich neighbors when you host a dinner. Instead, he says, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteousness. Meals are where people get to experience who Jesus is and what he teaches. Much of what he teaches is that we must reorient our ways of thinking about God and being with each other and others. We must rethink our places and our relationships. One theologian says that in coming to a table, we must choose humility, not humiliation. Because being at the table is not a right, but a privilege, extended by the host generosity. By sharing a meal with those who cannot reciprocate, we embody God's hospitality, an invitation given with no expectation of repayment. As a pair, today's parables teach us humility and hospitality are two sides of the same coin. Without humility, hospitality can become self-serving. Without hospitality, humility can turn into self-deprecation. Without humility, hospitality can become self-serving. Without hospitality, humility can turn into self-deprecation. It is also important to note who Jesus may be sharing the meal with, given what we know. It might have been Pharisees. Of all that I might say about the Pharisees, let me just note that they were obsessed with man-made rules, whereas Jesus is more concerned with God's love. The Pharisees scorned sinners, whereas Jesus seeks them out. Even though Jesus shared several meals with Pharisees, they often complained about his choice of table fellowship companions. But Jesus calls into question this kind of caste system, imagining instead hosts who choose to associate with people who are poor, crippled, lame, and blind as their new network. Yet, we have our ways of distinguishing one from another in order to structure our contemporary world. Oftentimes, these distractions among us hinder us from true fellowship with one another. Jesus' story is a reminder to us about the company we keep. Many, if not all of you, understand what this means. That we should broaden our tables without regard for status and what we may receive in return. Many of you are acting on Jesus' message right now at this time of struggle for many. I know it. I see it. You are rethinking the table and inviting many more. Just don't forget about your inner table. To expand your table, to rethink your guest list of all the many yous running around inside you, all the parts of your personality populating your psyche, fighting for attention. To wonder where you should sit and what that says, to seriously ask, how humble and hospitable am I? How open am I to the full, messy, scary me? That can be hard. It's intimidating to ask that of your inner table, but it can also be freeing. Remember, I sit here because I want control and comfort. But to stretch myself by naming that I need new relationships within can be a new form of control that is not fear-driven, that will not take me by surprise. But it's still uncomfortable. Can I welcome and refocus my own Pharisee within? My own Pharisee within, who is obsessed with the usual ways and structures that don't honor my fears, who says, that's how it has to be because it's always been that way. Hard to go against that. But I have hope. And I trust this might be the view I really need. this might be the view. On Sunday night, Kate used Margaret Wheatley's views of fear to remind us that all great spiritual traditions originated in an effort to overcome fear's effects on our lives. All great spiritual traditions originated in an effort to overcome fear's effects on our lives. Fearlessness is not being free of fear, but acknowledging that we do not need to be our fears. We can learn how to handle fear and what to do with fear by bravely encountering fear, turning toward it, being curious about it, until we're in relationship with it. And then fear changes. Once again, bravely encountering fear, turning toward it, becoming curious about it, until we are in relationship with it. What does my fear feel like? What does it smell like? Can I see those little wrinkles starting to form around the eyes? What do they look like? To be in a different relationship with my fear, I may need to set my table differently, invite new guests, linger longer, be less strategic and more open. I may need to bravely find a new place at the table. Jesus used meals to address serious matters and teach us about true relationship with God, self, and others. Jesus wants our tables to be different, and that requires more than just external action. It requires going deeper within to be strong enough to host dinners and banquets with the right spirit. The right spirit and intention that can change our lives. Tables are powerful. All are invited to this one, which is mysterious and welcoming and transformative, especially if we don't try to fully understand it. Who all is invited to your inner table? How well will you get to know them? What can that mean for communities in need at this time? Just imagine what that kind of spiritual hospitality might mean. A federal worker at our recent dinner said that serving others, especially through our meal packing program, which she mentioned, has been an important part of her health and stability at this time. To some, that might seem strange, but to a community seeking to follow Jesus, it can make perfect sense. Creating and sharing our tables with others. We need new relationship with God, self, and others at this time. Openness to new ways of understanding our roles as host and guest. If we do that well, perhaps we and many others can find those better conditions that both Jesus and Hafiz envisioned for us. Amen.